reality is. Existence is. It has a nature. It is what it is. It has an identity.
Right.
Okay, human beings have an identity. We don't get to choose our ultimate goals. We want life. We want health. We want beauty. We want intimacy. These are built in. We can attribute those to a god or not. We certainly have been built up in the stories of that. He's unwilling to budge on the story of the individual hero. Sam Harris is unwilling to budge on the distinct nature of science and what it means to build our stories on science or not to build them on science. Both of them are fixed. Both of them are unwilling to budge unless they can co-create a frame that recognizes both of the places where they're unwilling to budge, give both of them value, and then play with them.
Right.
And then play with them. So, Sam, why is it so important to you? Jordan, why is it so important to you? Let's actually find out the value underneath. Sam, you've got this incredible intellect. Rather than arguing with him about terms, argue with him about why it's important.
Yep, exactly.
You might find that in the end, Jordan backs out of his central conclusion. Because whenever he's really pressed, he says, there's a Piagetian game.
Yeah.
What is a Piagetian game? Science, empirical data. Like he's saying, there is no secular morality. There's this thing called a Piagetian game. Like what? The Piagetian game is secular morality. That's what it is. You can't use that argument and say that you can't have a secular morality.
Right. Totally.
Like now, Sam Harris, challenge him on that. Ask him how a Piagetian game is different than a secular morality.
Yep.
Answer, ask him the questions to get Jordan to actually articulate, because no one challenges him. No one challenges him down to the core.
Yeah.
And he might, when you ask him that question, he might have a good answer. I haven't heard it. I've been wanting someone to ask him that question.
What's the question again? Like if you were to ask.
Okay, so a Piagetian game, as Jordan Peterson says it, is so if two kids are playing, right, you can win the game, but if you win the game in a way that no one's willing to play with you, in the future, then you lose all of the benefits of playing all the future games.
Yeah.
So the strategy of winning at any cost is a winning strategy in that game, but you lose the entire iterated set of games with that person.
Yeah.
Right? So it's win the battle, lose the war. So you have to come up with a solution. You have to come up with a strategy that not only has you win the game, but has you lose sometimes.
Yep.
So that people will keep playing with you, so that you can get more than the value of winning the game. And this is like, if we look at Finite and Infinite Games by James Carse, right? A finite game is played so you get the title of winner. An infinite game is played so that you get the joy of the continued play. So this is the Piagetian game in Carsian terms.
Yeah.
Right? You have to play the game so that people will continue to play with you.
Yeah, totally.
Okay,
totally.
Then it's not just that person. You have to play a game that allows you to play with all kinds of people, because each game that you can play with each of those people offers you value.
Right, totally.
And so you have to play a game that actually creates a social context in which you can play more games. And if you play games that make the social context stronger through time, now you've got this Piagetian game. And the Piagetian game acts as a selection pressure for the dominance hierarchy, which gets built into the ultimate player of the dominance hierarchy, namely Jesus in his understanding. Like Jesus is the ultimate player of the dominance hierarchy. He is the hero, or one of the ultimate heroes, and he is a pretty cool hero. Like, okay, if you play like Jesus, you're going to win a lot of dominance hierarchies.
Yep.
Right? You're going to play in such a way that You get to play with the same person over time, and you
Yeah.
get to play with a lot of people, and you create a context in which people play with one another, because the more people play with one another, the more they have to bring to you in their games. And this is like the market system. The more you allow freedom and people get to trade according to their desires, they trade with the people with whom they can play iterated games through time. The market is an iterated game across players. It's a natural Piagetian game.
Yep.
Now, can it spin out of control? Of course.
Yep.
Right? Can you stop it? Right? Because iterative organic games grow around whatever structures you put in place. But that process, he's saying that the ultimate story of how to navigate status hierarchies or dominance hierarchies or social hierarchies,
Right.
that the nature, the feedback mechanisms of the Piagetian game hypothesis, that framework,
Right.
explains how we build up heroes.
Right.
And those heroes get encoded into the stories, and those stories get encoded into our psyche. So this Piagetian game serves as kind of a pressure in natural selection, where the people whose habits, whose character, whose style of play allows them to play iterated games with the same people, iterated games across people, games in which other people play with people such that when they come to your game, they bring more resources.
Yeah.
Right? When you take those three conditions,
Yeah.
they serve as a selection pressure
Yep.
for an optimal player.
Yep.
That optimal player gets brought into stories of heroes.
Yep.
Those heroes get selected for over time until you get an ultimate hero, such as Jesus Christ, such as Buddha, such as Luke Skywalker, such as Obi-Wan Kenobi, right?
Right.
So that ultimate hero, Jordan Peterson calls that religious.
Right. I think it's kind of problematic a little bit.
But that process is completely secular. The Piagetian game is a secular explanation for morals, which is what Piaget said he wanted to do. And Jordan Peterson says Piaget was attempting to create a secular basis for morality.
Yeah.
He did such a good job that whenever I get pressed, I use Piaget's secular morality explanation to justify my, quote, religious thing.
Yeah.
Let's have Sam Harris ask him that question.
Right.
Because Sam Harris is basically saying, look, if we look at morality, we can look at Piagetian games.
Right. Totally.
Right?
Totally.
Why do we want to have more games?
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? And Sam Harris puts it like, he says, okay, if you want to look for the ultimate good, if we want to say that there is a natural good in the universe, which does not come from God, but can be rationally explicated and articulated from analyzing actual lived experience,
Yep.
he says defining the good is difficult,
Yep.
but defining bad is relatively easy.
Yeah. That's what Harris says that?
Harris says that. And he offers three dimensions.
Yeah.
He says it's the most suffering for the greatest number of creatures for the longest period of time.
Yeah.
That's bad. If you imagine horrible suffering for all living beings throughout time, that's the worst possible outcome.
Right. Right.
In comparison to the worst possible outcome, anything with less suffering for less creatures over less period of time is relatively better.
Right. 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 Right.
Great. That's all the framework we need to create a secular morality.
Totally.
And that is essentially why a Piagetian game works. Because if you win the game...
I can see if I can answer.
Sure.
Right. So I still don't know if it accounts for what is it that cares about pain. That's the thing that's hard to get underneath. I'm not saying that makes it theological.
No. So let's ask the question: what is it that cares about pain?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's like, get it, like, it's like
let's
life. All of life seems to have that matter more than almost anything, right? Is pain. And there is this kind of thing that the hero, what makes the hero is it volunteers for it on purpose, right? It's willing to have pain for the sake of, in this case,
for less pain.
Game. Yeah. Yes, totally. For less pain, exactly.
It seeks less pain.
What is it, though? Can you create a secular account for? Can
you create a religious account for it? You can't create a religious account for it. You can't create a secular account for it. Why does the universe exist?
Yeah. Well, this is interesting. Yeah. So.
Yeah. Sorry for cutting that off.
I think that's what. There's that horizon beyond the horizons, right? That we get evidence for, right? In the individual caring about pain and less pain, and games and secular constructs are all in service of, like, it presupposes somebody gives a shit about something.
Yeah.
It's hard to get under that, right?
The being of being is care. It's Dasein. Like,
and
the being in the world cares.
This is where I think it's like this guy, Pseudo Dionysus. You ever heard of him?
No.
Yeah, dude. It's
trippy, dude.
It's basically like an early Christian religion. It's what brings Platonic philosophy into Christianity. Well, it's actually what brings philosophy, like Platonic philosophy, into Christianity. Thus,
kind of like Origin, or like Plotinus, or
yeah. So
Plotinus,
it's like
Plotinus.
And he talks about it basically talks about a negative theology, that there's and in the French, like some of the French phenomenologists, Marian, who wrote a book called God Without Being, right, basically said that, like, and this is actually it's interesting. This is where Heidegger kind of ended up too. This is what I like about, because I think Heidegger is part of the dark web as well, because he was looking for a fundamental ontology, right? That's what that's what he was trying to do when he wrote Being and Time, right? And that's why I didn't complete it, is because he's like, all right, we have not answered we have not explicitated the meaning of being. What do we mean when we say being? And he was like, being and time.
Being is that thing that you and I are saying. What is it that cares?
Yep, totally.
Okay, so I want to get back to that and ask a question about it.
Yeah.
Okay. So, answering the question, what is it that cares?
Yeah.
You're saying that that's important in some way. Let's say that we don't answer that. Let's say that we leave that unanswered.
Yeah.
Is that a problem?
Well, it's. Oh, no. I don't think it's a problem, but it's a something that to contend with, right? Like, so I'm not like it's because I've been having the same kind of issue with some of the things when Peterson talks about religion, right? Like, and he does the thing where he tries to catch people in the act of valuing something. And he's like, well, how do you know? Basically, he's like, no, the fact that you know to value that you have that goal, like, has a history, and we can track it down, and it's mythic, and the axioms is a kind of faith. Like, having axioms is a kind of faith, is how I've heard him talk about it. That there's something about to call that God, I think, is really problematic. To call that even religious, I think, is really problematic. Yeah, so I actually don't have an answer for it. But
okay. So for fun,
what's interesting though, it's also just what's interesting though, is what's bizarre to me about that is that, okay, somehow whatever that is that I don't have an answer for, which seems to give constitute how everything else goes has everything else go. So in some way, what is going is revealing something that is really mysterious, right? And there's a pragmatic approach where it's like with science, when you take the subjectivity out, right, which I think is where Sam's coming from. Sam's going like, look, like, I think Peterson would say that like that science is its side of religion, right? And I basically think what he's saying is that horizon in the background that you can't explicate scientifically, right, is because the thing that gives science, right, isn't scientific. And I think that's the basic argument he's trying to say, right? But I don't think it makes sense to necessarily call that religious.
So
but it's kind of mystical.
Oh, okay. So and this is, let's take a postmodern stance on this for a moment.
Yeah.
Like a rose by any other name smells just as sweet, but what you call something matters.
Yeah.
When you call something religious,
Mm-hmm.
you are using a word that has a cachet.
Yeah.
It has a lot of meanings behind it.
Yeah.
So when you say calling it religious is problematic,
right,
it's problematic in the sense that it brings in a lot of meanings that people have a lot of thoughts around. And when you call that religious, you get people like Sam Harris saying, that's not religious.
Yeah.
And now you get into a semantic set of arguments, and that's what they're doing with this truth thing. Okay, yes. Again, if you look around the room as an interior decorator,
mm-hmm. Yeah.
the things that you notice, the things that matter, are completely different than if you look around the room as as an architect. Like, the things that exist in the context of your goals.
Yep.
And so it is certainly the case that science exists in the context of a fundamental goal set, which I think Sam Harris can summarize very neatly as the desire to avoid suffering and to go towards the opposite of suffering, which happens to be extreme pleasure and beauty and intimacy and depth and wonder and awe for the most beings in consciousness over the longest period of time. And we can call that thriving, right? So you can get the good by examining the bad, which is incontrovertible. As Jordan Peterson says, life is suffering is the thing that you can't avoid.
Yeah. Yeah.
Great. He and Sam Harris are in the same boat on that. And when he says that is a secular argument. It is not a religious argument. Yes, it is true that religious figures have attempted to confront that. Yeah. But that does not make that realization religious.
Yeah.
Okay.
Totally.
Now you can call it religious because but now it's fraught. Using the term religion is fraught. I think it's fine if you use the word religion, but you just have to make sure everybody's playing the same game with the word, and he doesn't do that. Yeah. I think that's the real problem. It's a semantic postmodern problem, which he should know better about. Bad Jordan Peterson.
Right. It seems like there's got to be a new word here or something.
Yeah. Now, I think another way of bringing in the thing that you said, which is what is it that cares?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay. Now you can take a panpsychic view of that and say that, like, everything that exists in relation to something else.
Yep.
Quarks exist in relationship to other things. Atoms and nuclei exist in relationship to electrons, and electrons and molecules exist in proteins and cells and beings and ecosystems. They all exist in contexts.
Yeah.
And Whitehead calls it prehension.
Yeah.
Right. That you're actually feeling that which is you're in relationship to.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that is the precursor of consciousness.
Right.
Okay. Now there's this guy named Terrence Deacon, which, by the way, local guy, Berkeley. Whoa!
Is he awesome? Is he the guy that wrote Incomplete Nature?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. He's cool. He's very cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he takes this to a much deeper level. But we can say, you can either take a panpsychic approach and say that all of nature is conscious in the sense that it senses other things, that it exists in the context of other things, and therefore it has to have a way of connecting to those other things, and that connection is the basis of consciousness, a panpsychic approach.
Yeah.
Or you can say that the nature of replicating organisms or replicating structures can reach a point where you get multiple processes in dynamic tension.
Yeah, totally.
And that dynamic tension, when you get layers upon layers and orders of magnitude of these dynamic tensions coming together, create an awareness of how to hold that structure together. And the human consciousness in general and human consciousness in particular is the awareness of the dynamic structures as they interplay with one another.
Yeah, totally.
That there's a phenomenological thing built into the system.
Yeah.
And how that relates back to is, what is the thing that cares? Well, in the nature of human beings and brains and these animals which are conscious, and then this kind of reflective self-consciousness which is human, in which we have language. He calls us the symbolic species, right? We have language, and language creates a certain kind of dynamic tension that allows us to abstract and abstract our abstractions until we can create this self. And this is how we create worlds through these symbols. Totally. We are a symbolic species. And therefore, the reason we care, that which cares, is the network of symbols.
Yep.
Okay? So in that case, it's the network of symbols that can recognize that suffering is bad, that suffering for multiple creatures is worse, that suffering for multiple creatures through time is the worst. We can abstract that process, and therefore we can get a good. We can recognize what it's like to feel pleasure, and that feeling pleasure across multiple beings, and not just physical pleasure, but also mental pleasure, success and joy, and spiritual pleasure of realization and intimacy and appreciation of beauty and structure and symmetry and pattern. Like all of these levels of pleasure for more beings across time is better. We can abstract that. We are the symbolic species that can abstract that. What is that? We are that. Now, in a sense, I don't think you need to answer that in order to do a Jordan Peterson move, which is, let's just look at what our culture has decided is good and bad. But let's look at that systematically, scientifically, right? If there's any challenge I have with Jordan Peterson, is that he has not done the psychometrics of myth. He has not taken all of the myths and run them through psychometric tests so that he can pull out and do the factor analysis. He hasn't done that. He's done that intuitively, like a case study.
Totally.
I think that he should marry with Sam Harrison. Religion and science should marry. And he should use a scientific method on the myth. So we can find out what is suffering, what is not suffering, and use the collective knowledge of our culture to figure out the factors, and then figure out what are the stories that facilitate the development towards better. Now, it still doesn't answer how do you determine better, and you can say that that's built in and that's religious and that there's an inborn better. I like to say reason requires a reason to use it. Right? Because this word reason has two major uses. One is logic. Like reason is to be logical. It's to use a set of logical inferences. You use a set of procedures and iterative procedures to do the arithmetic, to do the math of calculation for valid conclusions based on, right? So there's logic, but then there's values. And I call the difference between logic and rationality. Logic is reason. Rationality is reason. Rationality requires a goal. Is it rational to do the thing? You have to do logic, but you have to have a goal.
Right.
Does it lead to the goal? Then it is rational to do it to achieve the goal. Does it lead away from the goal? Then it is irrational. Might be logical, but irrational.
Right.
Reason requires a reason to use it. There is reason in terms of logic and reason in terms of values. Right? Jordan Peterson says it's the values that determines the logic. Sam Harrison says, yeah, but we use logic to determine which values are best.
Yeah.
And yes, there is a spiral, but when we get down to it, we can use scientific methods to sort through the values. Now, Jordan Peterson is doing that. He's just doing it as a case study instead of psychometrics. He hasn't done the factor analysis.